Okay, thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Hilda. Right, our next speaker, Joseph Healy, a Unite safety activist who's influential within his workplace. Hello, Joseph.
Hello, Marie. Well, actually, I'm a retired member of Unite now, and people have been talking about experts, and I'm actually an autodidact, really, because prior to the pandemic, I was an equalities rep in my workplace, so very up to speed on equalities, but not on health and safety. I had no health and safety training. I didn't know very much at all. I mean, I never heard of hazards and so on. And when the pandemic hit, I had to learn very fast. It was a steep learning curve. And I found that my shop steward died shortly just after the pandemic started, and I was elevated to a position. And I was working in a small charity, disability charity, in a very old building, which was very, very bad for um, cold in the winter, not very well insulated and so on, but there were a lot of issues, obviously new issues. So my background had been that in the 90s, I was diagnosed HIV positive and became very, very active in the very active groups around HIV, which were, you had to really bone up very fast on what was happening on treatments, on drugs, and so on. So I came from that background, and I could see very early on that the pandemic was going to have a big impact. And I remember saying to my manager, what are we doing about working from home? Who looked at me as if I had three heads, because people were much slower to grasp the impact of all of this. So I started attending webinars very quickly. I mean, like everybody else, I had to learn to Zoom very quickly. And I found the webinars run by the TUC, by Hazards, by HSE. I started attending the Independent Sage updates and began to bone up very, very, very quickly. Working for a small charity, which was a disability charity and which had a number of clinically extremely vulnerable people like myself working in it was an advantage. And also the fact that we had a CEO who was very on top of equalities issues and very willing to work with the union. So I had a young colleague who was also disabled, and she and I worked together on putting together a package of measures and having a very positive dialogue with the management. So, for example, we remained working remotely. I left in June 2022, and up until that point, we remained working remotely. So there was no push to get people to return. We had areas of disagreement, like the CEO would argue that, about ventilation, well, we can simply open the windows. And I said, well, how's that going to work in winter in a very cold building? We do need other measures. And they agreed to, even when that CEO left, a new CEO arrived, to install HEPA filters. And the other day I met my former manager who told me the HEPA filters are still there, still functioning well. And we brought in other measures such as, visitors coming to the building would need to have masks and so on. So there was an open door to work with. So I have to say that organization is one of the few, in my experience, in the not-for-profit sector in London, which actually does have now still very, very good policies on COVID safety. However, when I left in June 2022, I was offered a position in Unite the Union as a regional officer, and it was a temporary position because I was planning on retiring soon afterwards. And I found myself dealing with the voluntary sector as a whole across London, mainly smaller organizations similar to ones I've been dealing with, a lot of citizens advice bureaus and so on. And that was where I was truly shocked at what I saw, because going on some visits to some of these organizations in buildings which, I thought my building had been bad, but some buildings I entered, the windows didn't open. There was no ventilation whatsoever. And it's at that point I became an evangelist for clean air and ventilation. And I began to talk not just to the employers whom I visited, but also to the union reps. And I have to say, most of the reps I met, this is at this stage, 2022, and when you consider after everything that had happened, their main issues were still terms and conditions and wages and so on, naturally, but was very little awareness around issues like ventilation. And I quickly developed a sort of educational role in working with many of those small charities. I have to say, some of them I think still don't have, proper health and safety provisions in relation to ventilation and so on. Within the union itself, I remember attending a meeting in the regional headquarters, which was in the education rooms down in the basement, which is where a lot of people come for training sessions, and a CO2 monitor going off. And one of the officers saying, "Oh, I'll just unswitch it." And I have to say that I was horrified, but the education officer who was there quickly took control and said, "No, no, no, this is really important. We need to go upstairs to the boardroom where there's a proper filtration system and so on." So I began to push with the regional secretary at the time for proper filtration in those rooms and other parts of the building. I continued, because I was on the LGBT committee, I continued to attend meetings of that committee, masked, and always pushing for filtration and safety. And as a result, for example, the Birmingham office of Unite, which is where some of the meetings were held, installed a filtration system because of my constant nagging. And I also saw in the minutes of the National Executive, because I'd been lobbying the National Executive incessantly, that all new buildings in Unite and all refurbishment works carried out in future will include a full filtration system. And that includes the national headquarters in Holborn, which at the moment is not very good, but is actually being refurbished. And so, I have had a direct impact within the union. And
Joseph. I'm sorry, Joseph. Do you know what? This is all sounding brilliant, and I think unfortunately it's just that I've got to keep everybody to the times.
Of
but
course.
I think we'll definitely want to hear a few more of any of your achievements that you've made in the breakout rooms, because they're sounding really interesting, and I think they'd be really, really informative and helpful.
I just wanted to thank our regional secretary, who's been very supportive of this conference.